The Trials of Tattypoo. On the same evening Philidor and Akbat flew off from the Osier Isles. The Good Witch of the North sat quietly before her fire, spinning silver from straw. From time to time Agnes, her pet dragon, would toss a log on the blaze and set it glowing with her fiery breath. The cat with two tails purred drowsily in the chimney corner, and nothing could have been cozier than this little room in the Good Witch's hut. And Tattypoo was content. Ruling over the North Country, settling disputes between its small kingdoms, and advising the Gillikens about everything from birthday parties to preserves, filled her time most pleasantly. The door of the Good Witch's hut was never bolted, and no one, coming for help or advice, had ever been turned away. So though her skin was drawn and wrinkled and her hair white as snow, and the little hut plainly, even poorly furnished, Tattypoo was perfectly happy. But Agnes, the amiable dragon, was not. Agnes longed for grandeur and style and felt that the ruler of all the Gillikens should wear a crown or live in a castle. Agnes, while not exactly conceited, felt that her own beauty was utterly wasted in this little hut. She longed to flash her silver scales and switch her tail at the fine courts of Oz. But Tattypoo was neither vain nor ambitious, and only chuckled when Agnes complained of the poorness of their dwelling, the plainness of the food, and the lack of servants to wait upon them. She had lived so long in the purple forest on the Gilliken mountainside that she had grown to love every tree and tumbling brook and even the witch's little cottage. At the time the wizard first came to Oz, it was ruled over, as you well know, by 4 witches. Little Dorothy's house fell on the Wicked Witch of the East, and later this same little Dorothy had put out with a pail of water the Wicked Witch of the West. Glinda the Good Sorceress had conquered the Bad Witch of the South, and Tattypoo had conquered Mombi, the Wicked Witch of the North, not before she had stolen Cheeriob's queen, however, and done many mischievous transformations. At first Mombi had been deprived of her magic powers, but after her last attempt to capture the Emerald City she, too, had been put out with a pail of water, so that Tattypoo was the only witch of any power or consequence in Oz. And as she explained over and over again to Agnes, being a good witch in an important country like Oz was honor enough for her, and as long as she used her magic powers for good and so long as the Gillikens were peaceful and prosperous under her rule, she would be perfectly satisfied and happy. Agnes, in spite of her vanity, was as good a dragon as Tattypoo was a witch, and had really earned her title of the amiable dragon. For Agnes had never devoured any captive maidens, burned down a village, or threatened a kingdom. She was a small cozy sort of a dragon, too, taking up only about half a room and wearing rubbers to keep her claws from scratching the floor. She had wandered into Tattypoo's hut the very day the Good Witch had conquered Mombi, and had lived with her ever since. She was so good-tempered and companionable, Tattypoo put up quite cheerfully with her occasional dissatisfied spells. Tonight, Agnes was feeling particularly dissatisfied. In the morning Tattypoo had disenchanted a poor forest maiden. The girl had knocked on the door and asked for food. Tattypoo after one look realized she was under some evil spell and immediately consulted her books of sorcery. A few magic potions and passes had changed the maiden to her rightful self. And she had been no less than a king's daughter, whom Tattypoo had sent home on a fast wish to her father's castle. "If you can change poor girls to princesses, why don't you do something for yourself?" complained Agnes, giving the fire a vicious poke. "I don't mind being a dragon. Dragons are unusual and interesting, but witches are ugly and out of style." "Were you always a witch? Do you always intend to be a witch? Were you never young or pretty at all?" Agnes' question made Tattypoo pause. The hum of the spinning wheel ceased as she tried to recall the past. Had she ever been young or pretty? Letting the silver thread slide through her fingers, she gazed thoughtfully into the fire, but it was all dim and hazy, and the Good Witch could remember nothing of her youth or the days before she had come to the purple forest. She remembered distinctly her first meeting with Mombi. The Wicked Witch was changing a woodcutter into a tree stump, and Tattypoo, running forward, had put a stop to it. Her magic proved stronger than Mombi's, so it had not been hard to overpower her. Not only that, but she had driven Mombi out of the forest and taken possession of her hut and magic tools. Later, the Gillikens had come in crowds to thank Tattypoo and beg her to rule over them in Mombi's place. So Tattypoo had stayed on, undoing as much of Mombi's mischief as she could and growing fonder and fonder of the peace-loving Gillikens. She had always been so busy helping other people, she had never thought about herself at all, but tonight Agnes' question made her vaguely unhappy and she began to feel really annoyed that she could remember nothing of her own past. "I must have been young, once," murmured Tattypoo, absently leaning down to stroke the cat with two tails. "Even witches are young." "Of course they are," sniffed the dragon impatiently, "and if I had your magic powers, I'd be young again." "It wouldn't be right to practice magic for my own benefit," answered Tattypoo in a shocked voice. "It's against the law." "Is there any law against youth and beauty?" demanded Agnes tartly, but the good witch kept shaking her head and muttering over and over, "It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right." "Well, at least you could see how you used to look," said Agnes, waving her tail toward the stairway. "Surely there is no law against that?" "How?" asked Tattypoo, leaning back in her chair and fixing her mild blue eyes full upon the amiable dragon. "Why, the witch's window." "Let's have a look through the witch's window," coaxed Agnes, and sliding across the floor she began pulling her silver length up the rickety steps of the cottage. Tattypoo, reaching for her staff, hobbled hurriedly after her. "I never thought of the window," panted Tattypoo, feeling extremely excited and fluttery. In the attic of Mombi's hut was a curious dormer window, its two leaded panes opening out upon the slanting roof. One pane was of blue glass and one of pink. Tattypoo had often consulted the witch's window when her subjects needed to know about the past or the future. One look through the blue pane showed the person looking out the past, and one look through the pink pane showed the future. It was curious that Tattypoo had lived in the hut all these years and never looked out the witch's window, but as I said a minute ago, she was so happy and so busy she never thought of herself at all. And now, it was largely to satisfy Agnes that she tiptoed over to the dormer window. First she pushed back her cap ruffles and straightened her specs. "Well," asked Agnes, pulling herself laboriously up on the sill. "What do you see?" Instead of answering, Tattypoo gave a terrible scream and jumped right out the window. Yes, she did. "Stop! Help! What are you doing?" shrieked the poor dragon, falling halfway out herself. But the good witch had disappeared, staff, cap, spectacles and all. And in her desperate concern for her unfortunate mistress, Agnes lost her balance and falling out the witch's window disappeared as quickly and completely as Tattypoo. So of course, there was no one to answer the door. Rap! 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 The knocker rose and fell. Then the latch was lifted cautiously and in stepped a small boy. It was the Prince of the Osier Isles, for the blue gull had brought him straight to the good witch's door. "Tattypoo," called Philidor softly. "Where are you, Tattypoo?" But there was no reply, only the rush of a black shape as the cat with two tails scampered across the cottage floor and jumped out of the low window.